It could be said that most of us may never understand the reasons that people commit horrific acts that harm or end the lives of any of their fellow human beings. These are senseless and tragic events that leave us shaken. What's more unsettling, though, in my opinion, are those cases that involve a young person who takes the lives of their very own family members. This video will dive into the stories surrounding two of those cases. Welcome to my channel. My name is Chrissy, and I typically discuss things that are strange, mysterious, and creepy. If that interests you, then please subscribe or follow me. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button, leave me a comment, or share this video with a friend. That truly helps out a small channel like mine. Okay, now let's get into our first story. It was a quiet Sunday in Michigan. November 29th, 1998 was just like any other late fall day. A chill in the air, leaves scattered on the ground, and families across town enjoying the tail end of Thanksgiving weekend. Inside the Privacky family home, relatives gathered to celebrate a milestone, Roland Privacky's 78th birthday. It was supposed to be a day of joy, a simple family gathering. But by sundown, the house would become the site of a massacre so brutal, so incomprehensible, it would send shockwaves through the tight-knit community and the nation. Before we dive into what happened, let's talk about the Privacky family. Stephen and Linda Privacky were well respected in Muskegon. Stephen, a middle school teacher, was known for his patience and kindness, while Linda worked as a receptionist, always greeting people with a warm smile. Their two sons, Jed and Seth, couldn't have been more different. Jed, the older of the two, was a college student with a bright future ahead of him. Seth, on the other hand, had struggled through school and had a reputation for being quiet and withdrawn. The friction between Seth and his parents had been escalating for months. At 18 years old, Seth had dropped out of high school and was living at home with no clear plans for his future. His parents, desperate to motivate him, had recently given him an ultimatum: get his life together or face the consequences. To Seth, it felt like he was being cornered, and that pressure would ultimately become the trigger for a horrific series of events. The Privacky home that Sunday was filled with all the usual sounds of a family celebration: laughter, conversations, the clinking of dishes. In addition to Stephen, Linda, and Roland, Jed was there with his girlfriend, 19-year-old April Boss. The group had spent the afternoon enjoying each other's company, completely unaware of what Seth had been planning. At some point during the gathering, Seth retrieved a .22 caliber Ruger semi-automatic pistol that his father kept in the house. The gun had been loaded, and Seth knew exactly where to find it. He waited until the moment was right, when his family was most vulnerable. It started with his father, Stephen. Seth approached him from behind and shot him in the back of the head. Linda, startled by the sound, turned to see what had happened, and Seth shot her next. Roland, sitting nearby, became the third victim. Jed and April, sitting in another part of the house, heard the commotion and rushed toward the source. When they saw what was happening, they tried to flee, but it was too late. Seth shot them both. April's injuries weren't immediately fatal, and Seth, showing no mercy, shot her again to ensure she wouldn't survive. In total, 5 members of Seth's family were killed in less than 15 minutes. The house fell silent. Blood pooled on the floor, the birthday cake sitting untouched on the table. For most people, this would be the moment of overwhelming regret or panic. But Seth's response was chillingly calculated. With the house littered with evidence of his crime, Seth called a friend, Stephen Wallace, to help him clean up. Wallace later testified that when he arrived, Seth confessed to everything in excruciating detail. Wallace initially helped move some of the bodies and discussed ways to cover up the crime. But as the reality of what he was involved in set in, Wallace panicked and fled, leaving Seth alone in the house. The next morning, the murders were discovered when a family friend arrived at the house and saw Roland's lifeless body through a window. Police were immediately called, and what they found inside was beyond horrifying. Investigators described the scene as execution style and noted the calculated precision of each shot. Seth had fled the scene, triggering a statewide manhunt. His photo was plastered across television screens and newspapers, accompanied by the chilling details of the massacre. For 3 days, Seth remained on the run, leaving the community on edge. People locked their doors, worried he might strike again. On December 1st, 1998, Seth was found hiding at a friend's house. He surrendered without incident, his demeanor calm, almost detached. During his interrogation, Seth confessed, explaining that he was angry at his parents for what he perceived as constant criticism and pressure. To him, this wasn't a moment of blind rage. It was something he had thought about for weeks. The trial was swift. Seth pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, sparing the community a lengthy legal battle. In 1999, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with people who had once known the Privacky family, struggling to understand how a teenager could commit such a monstrous act. Seth showed no emotion during his sentencing, a fact that haunted the victim's friends and neighbors. Some believed he was incapable of remorse. Others thought he had simply shut himself off from the gravity of what he had done. For over a decade, Seth lived out his days in prison, but in 2010, his story took an unexpected turn. Seth was part of an attempted prison escape involving several inmates. As they scaled a fence, guards opened fire. Seth was struck and killed, ending his life at 30 years old. The Privacky murders left an indelible mark on Muskegon, Michigan. The quiet home on West Sternberg Road has long since been sold, but for those who remember that day, it will always be a house of horrors. It was the morning of June 15, 2021, in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The kind of morning where the world felt still, peaceful even. But inside one of the pristine homes on Oakleaf Court, that peace was shattered in the most unimaginable way. At 8:23 a.m., a frantic 911 call came through. The voice on the other end belonged to a young man, clearly distressed, claiming his home had been invaded. He said he'd been shot, but somehow managed to survive. The caller was 20-year-old Alexander Jackson, a seemingly ordinary college student. What he reported to dispatchers was every family's worst nightmare. He said his father, his mother, and his younger sister had all been gunned down in their own home. He begged for help, claiming he too was a victim in this horrifying ordeal. When officers arrived minutes later, the scene they walked into could only be described as chilling. The Jackson family home, known to neighbors as a place of warmth and laughter, had been transformed into something out of a horror film. In the living room, they found Alexander lying on the floor, bleeding from a superficial gunshot wound to his foot. He was alive, coherent, and ready to talk. But the story Alexander told raised more questions than answers. Alexander claimed that an intruder had broken into the home while the family was still asleep. This unknown assailant, he said, was armed and determined. Alexander recalled waking up to the sound of gunfire and being shot as he tried to confront the intruder. He said he blacked out and awoke to find his family dead. It sounded plausible, even terrifying, but police noticed something strange. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been taken from the home. And the weapon used, a .22 caliber rifle, was later confirmed to belong to the Jackson family. It had been left at the scene, wiped clean of fingerprints. This, investigators thought, didn't align with Alexander's claim of an outsider. And then, there was Alexander's injury, a single gunshot wound to his foot, a wound that police quietly noted was far from life-threatening and seemed deliberate. To understand this case, you have to understand the Jackson family. Jan Jackson, 61, was a retired IT professional, a man known for his kindness and calm demeanor. Melissa Jackson, 68, had dedicated her life to her family and her community. And Sabrina Jackson, just 19 years old, was described as bright, artistic, and full of potential. To everyone who knew them, they were the picture of a loving, close-knit family. So the question loomed large: who would want to harm them? As investigators delved deeper into the case, inconsistencies in Alexander's story began to surface. He said he had been asleep when the shooting started, yet gunpowder residue was found on his hands. He claimed he had no idea where the rifle was kept, yet he described the weapon in detail during questioning. And then came the most damning piece of evidence, a timeline that simply didn't add up. 2.5 years later, in January 2023, the case went to trial. Prosecutors argued that Alexander Jackson wasn't a victim of a home invasion, but rather the perpetrator of a calculated, cold-blooded crime. they painted a chilling picture of a young man who, for reasons still unclear, turned on his own family. The defense, meanwhile, maintained Alexander's innocence, claiming that the lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the murders left reasonable doubt. But the jury saw it differently. After just hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict, guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. Alexander Jackson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Even now, the case of Alexander Jackson leaves behind more questions than answers. Why would a young man, seemingly with everything going for him, commit such an unthinkable act? Was it financial strain, familial conflict, or something deeper, darker, and harder to comprehend? In the end, the tragedies of the Jackson and Privacky families show us that the greatest dangers don't always come from the outside. They can come from within our homes, among the people we trust the most in our lives. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe for more true crime deep dives like this one and much more mysterious content. Until next time, please stay safe out there, and as always, stay curious.